You, our youth leaders, to imagine a better world. The Ms. Nanavita already did that, and Mr. Kathmandu also did. So I'd like to share with you the image that we Americans have of the world. I will, since I can't speak on behalf of 330 million Americans, let me just speak on behalf of my government and give you a sense of how we see this world. So let me ask you to imagine that today is the first day of our international community. The first day that our world comes into being with all, how many are we? 180 some countries in the world. We see this world, we see all the countries in it, and the first thing that we Americans think that we need to do is we step out into the world and we go and explore it, because we don't really understand it that well. It's a brand new world. So the very first thing that we need to do is to understand how that world works. Right? And hopefully that world also understands how we work. And I think this holds whether you're American or Nepali or Bangladeshi or Malaysian or Maldivian. We step out and seek to understand the world and have it understand the world, have the world understand us. We think of this as mutual understanding. We see this world with all these countries and we say, how does that world work? Who is in charge? And of course, our problem of our chaotic world is that no one is really in charge. We do have the United Nations where we're all represented, but we all arrive at the United Nations and we all have our say and we all vote on different ideas. But the United Nations can't then oblige us or impel us to do what we talked about at the United Nations Forum. So there's no one global government for the world. And so we Americans, and I think most of the rest of the world, we seek to mold and shape a world order. A world order in which each country has its own sovereignty, can make its own decisions about how it's going to govern itself, where borders are, the country can protect its own borders, right? Where we have territorial integrity. You've heard of these big words being tested right now in parts of Europe. So we try to structure a world order where when we travel, we have similar civil aviation rules, or when we have a global pandemic like we're in now, we have global health rules. We try to create a world order with rules and norms that hopefully most of us will follow. So I think up until now, this is pretty similar whether you're an American like me or a Nepali. We step out onto the world, we seek to understand it, which is what you're doing here today, we're all doing here today, and we try and shape the world that we want to see. If you're American, you also look out into the world and see there's a lot of chaos and maybe even threats out there. So you worry about your country's security. Maybe it's the threats of weapons of mass destruction, or the drug flows, or terrorists which flow across our borders, or trafficking in persons. You're worried about all these security threats that might affect you. So we work on security issues and understand that our security in the United States is interdependent with security everywhere else in the world. Then, because we are concerned about the well-being of our citizens, we think of how we're going to make our country prosperous, how our economy is going to grow or withstand the shocks of a pandemic or of war, So we want to be prosperous for our citizens, and we understand that in this globalized world, we can't be prosperous if the rest of the world isn't prosperous along with us. So we're concerned about the prosperity in other parts of the world. Then this is where things start to get maybe a little bit different from country to country, because each of us from our countries carries the weight of the history of our country and the culture along with us. For the United States, more than 200 years ago, you know that we fought the British monarch in a revolution so that we could rule ourselves, so that we would be a democracy and not part of the British monarchy. Might sound familiar to a few other countries in this room as well. So these ideas of ruling ourselves, deciding who's going to be our leader, what is our legislature, our parliament going to be like, how our courts are going to be independent, how we're going to have freedom of speech so that our media can speak freely and peacefully about what we want. This is the kind of democracy that we're still trying to build in the United States, and that because it's so ingrained into who we are as Americans, we carry this idea, this value of wanting to defend democracy in other parts of the world along with us when we step out into the world. Then our country, as you know, was also born with a multitude of ways in which we put some of our residents down. Right? For those who were British colonizers at the very early days, we found indigenous people in North America, and we did not care very much about them. We took their lands and moved in and made ourselves at home. We still have, of course, a good number of indigenous people in the United States, and we are now continuing to do that work of recuperating a more healthy society in which all of our citizens, all of our residents are viewed, regardless of what religion you are, of what skin color you are. We were also born with a sin of slavery in the United States. Regardless of what gender you are, American women did not get the vote until 1919. It was quite a while. Regardless of what religion you come from, what part of the country you come from, what gender or sexual orientation you come from, these are the elements of a more just society that we've been trying to construct in the United States for so long. So I call this quadrant justice, social justice, and sometimes here I'm going to call it dignity, human dignity. And even though security and prosperity are truly globalized now for all of the world and are interdependent, these values of democracy and human dignity are not quite globalized in the same way. And as Ms. Nanavita said, as Mr. Ismail said, these are the issues of social justice and of dignity, of democratic systems where we can all say our piece. Perhaps these are the areas where you all can lead the way at this conference and in our world. This is nothing less than what we hope, what we expect from you, that you will help us imagine a world that is more democratic and more dignified for every human being in it. Thank you very much.
When I was invited for this event, I don't know whether it happened to my fellow speakers, but I was not asked to speak on a particular topic. Oftentimes it's a good thing, because you can say what you want to. But when it comes to addressing a dynamic and a vibrant group of young leaders such as yourself, it is a daunting task. So I thought about it, and I thought to myself that perhaps this is a good opportunity for me to share with you some questions, as Shevan said, that I have been mulling over the last several months. And I have a feeling that perhaps you have also asked yourself the same questions. How has COVID-19 reshaped our lives? What are some lessons that we have learned in the aftermath of the pandemic? Do we need to reimagine the world that we live in? If so, what will it look like? Since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic more than 2 years ago, we know it has claimed over 6 million lives, destroyed innumerable livelihoods, and brought the global economy to a halt. Based on the current trajectory, the path to achieving the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 appears to be extremely arduous. In a way, COVID-19 has acted as the big revealer, making visible things that perhaps were invisible to many of us before. It has both laid bare and intensified discrimination across intersecting identities based on gender, sexuality, ability, ethnicity, location, and economic status. It has revealed the precarity of livelihoods in our societies. The pandemic has wiped out jobs at an extremely significant pace around the world. In 2020 alone, the combined earnings of workers fell by $3.7 trillion globally. Informal workers in particular experienced a sharp drop in their income, with women losing a greater share of their pre-pandemic earnings and recovering them much slower than men. COVID-19 has also pushed into crisis mode an already fragile care economy. With the pandemic-enforced lockdowns, limited public services, both the extent and intensity of unpaid care work has become acute. We all know that in our families, in our communities, it is women and girls who bear a disproportionate burden of unpaid work. Data collected from 16 countries during the pandemic shows that women did 29% more childcare per week as compared to men. The pandemic has also shown how unprepared the world is for systemic challenges, re-emphasizing the urgency of other rapidly escalating crises, including environmental degradation and climate change. Like the care economy, ecosystems and natural resources are a critical foundation for our society. However, for far too long, we have taken them for granted. The result is overexploitation of natural resources, loss of key habitats and biodiversity. We know that the impacts of environmental degradation are unevenly distributed, disproportionately affecting